I knew my marriage was over the moment I stopped caring if he touched me or not. It wasn't a dramatic fight. It wasn't a betrayal that left me gasping for air. It was something quieter, something far more dangerous. The slow, suffocating realization that I didn't feel anything anymore. For years, Mark and I had lived like strangers who shared the same last name. We had routines, not passion, conversations, not intimacy, and love. Love was something I had stopped recognizing a long time ago. It wasn't always like this. In the beginning, we were that couple, wild, hungry for each other, finishing each other's sentences. But time had a way of stealing things from you. What started as small silences turned into entire evenings without a single meaningful word. What used to be eager kisses before work became nothing more than an automatic nod, a muttered, "See you later." By the time I suggested therapy, I wasn't hoping to fix us. I was hoping to at least understand what went wrong. And then I met him. I wasn't expecting Dr. Adrian Cole to be the kind of man who made you forget what you were saying mid-sentence. He had this effortless confidence, a voice that made you lean in, and a presence that filled the room without trying. The first time I sat across from him, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, noticed. "Jane, Mark, welcome," he said, shaking both our hands. His grip was firm, his eyes focused. When he looked at you, he really looked. Mark was stiff beside me, his usual disinterest barely hidden behind a forced nod. He never wanted to be there, but he was doing it for the sake of appearances. "So," Adrian said, his tone warm but professional, "tell me why you're here." Silence. Mark waited for me to speak first, like he always did. I swallowed. "We're disconnected." "Disconnected how?" I exhaled. Like two people living separate lives under the same roof. Adrian nodded, his eyes searching mine, as if he could read the words I wasn't saying. "And how does that make you feel, Jane?" I hesitated. No one had asked me that in a long time. Not my friends, not my husband, not even myself. "Empty," I whispered. Mark shifted uncomfortably beside me. "Look, I know I'm not the most affectionate guy. I work a lot, but it's not like we fight or anything. Not fighting isn't the same as being happy, Mark." I cut in, surprising even myself. Adrian's gaze flicked between us, his expression unreadable. "When was the last time you two felt truly connected?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. Neither of us had an answer. The weeks that followed were a blur of sessions where I spoke more than I had in years, where Adrian asked me questions I wasn't ready to answer, where Mark grew more distant instead of closer. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I started noticing things I shouldn't. The way Adrian leaned in when I spoke, as if every word mattered. The way his sleeves rolled up just enough to show strong, tanned forearms. The way his voice, deep and soothing, made my pulse do things it had no business doing. I told myself it was nothing, just the natural reaction of a woman starved for attention. But then there were moments that made it feel like more than just my imagination. Like the time I caught him staring at me when he thought I wasn't looking. Or the time his hand lingered a little too long when he passed me a glass of water. Or the way he'd say my name, slowly, deliberately, "Jane." He was dangerous, he was wrong, and yet I kept going back. One evening, Mark skipped our session. Work, he claimed. I should have been annoyed. Instead, I was relieved. It meant an hour alone with Adrian. "Rough day?" he asked as I sat down. I let out a dry laugh. "When is it not?" His eyes softened. "You seem tired." Tired. That was the perfect word. I was tired of feeling invisible.
invisible, tired of pretending, tired of waking up every day and dreading the life I had built. And in that moment, Adrian did something no one had done in years. He listened. I talked about the loneliness, about the way Mark made me feel like I was just another piece of furniture in the house, about how I missed feeling wanted. And when I finished, he didn't give me a standard therapist response. He just looked at me, long and hard, before saying, "You deserve to be seen, Jane." My breath hitched, because in that moment, I knew I had just stepped onto a path I wouldn't be able to walk away from. Some mistakes come with warnings. Others happen so quietly, so gently, that you don't even realize you've crossed the line until it's too late.
Mark barely showed up anymore, always finding an excuse. Late meetings, unexpected calls, sheer disinterest. And for the first time in our marriage, I didn't care. In fact, I hoped he wouldn't show up, because when Mark wasn't there, Adrian wasn't just my therapist. He was something else entirely. He was the man who made me feel alive again. And it was terrifying how quickly I became addicted. It started small. A glance that lasted too long. A fleeting brush of fingers when he handed me a glass of water. A moment of silence that should have felt awkward, but instead crackled with something unspoken. Then one evening, I broke. I had spent the whole day restless, my mind filled with thoughts of him. I told myself I was imagining it, that whatever was happening between us was just in my head. But then, as I sat across from him in his dimly lit office, the air thick with tension, I noticed something in his eyes, a hesitation, a battle, and that's when I knew I wasn't imagining it. "Jane," he said quietly, his voice heavier than usual. I swallowed hard. "Yes." He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck like he was trying to stop himself from saying something he shouldn't. I leaned forward, my pulse hammering. "What is it?" His eyes flicked to my lips, just for a second. But it was long enough. And in that moment, I did something reckless, something stupid. I reached out and touched his hand. It was nothing, just the lightest brush of my fingertips against his skin. But the way he inhaled sharply, the way his muscles tensed beneath my touch, it was everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment in my head, over and over again. The way he looked at me, the way I felt when I touched him. I should have felt guilty, but I didn't. Instead, I felt something far more dangerous. I wanted more. The next session, Mark didn't bother showing up again. I should have canceled. I should have taken it as a sign that we were wasting our time. But instead, I went anyway. I didn't dress up, not exactly, but I paid more attention to the little things. The way my blouse fit, the way my perfume lingered, the way my lips looked when I smiled. And when I walked into Adrian's office, the moment our eyes met, I knew something had changed. He knew it too. We tried to pretend at first. We went through the motions, talking about my marriage, about my feelings, about things that didn't matter anymore. But there was no more room for pretending when I said, "What if I don't want to fix things with Mark?" Adrian's breath caught. I had never seen him look so torn. "Jane," he said, his voice low, "we can't." But his eyes told a different story. I stood up, walking towards him, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Then tell me to leave," I whispered. Silence. A long, dangerous silence. And then, instead of pushing me away, he reached for me. His hands, warm and strong, landed on my waist. I felt his breath against my skin before I felt his lips. And just like that, we broke every rule.
I wasn't thinking about the consequences when I let Adrian kiss me that night. I wasn't thinking about Mark. I wasn't thinking about what it meant to be a married woman standing in a dimly lit therapist's office, melting into the arms of the man who was supposed to fix my marriage. All I knew was that I hadn't felt alive in years. And Adrian? He was breathing life back into me. After that night, nothing was the same. Therapy wasn't about my marriage anymore. It wasn't about saving what was left of Mark and me. It was about him. About the way he looked at me when I walked into the room. About the way his hands knew exactly where to hold me, how to pull me closer. About the way I craved him like an addiction I had no interest in quitting. At first, we were careful. Locked doors, whispered words, the excuse of extended sessions when no one was around. But soon, it wasn't enough. 1 hour stolen in his office turned into late-night calls that lasted until dawn. His touch turned into something I ached for, something I needed just to get through the day. And the worst part? I stopped feeling guilty about it. I told myself that Mark had already lost me long before Adrian found me. That the woman I used to be, Mark's wife, his partner, had died long ago. Adrian wasn't taking me from my husband. He was bringing me back to life. But secrets don't stay secrets forever. And the first crack in our world appeared one evening when Mark came home early. I had just finished a session with Adrian. My skin was still tingling from his touch, my lips swollen from his kiss. I barely had time to compose myself before Mark walked through the door. "Good session?" he asked, loosening his tie. I nodded too quickly. "Yeah, same old stuff." He eyed me strangely. "You look different." My heart hammered. "Different how?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Lighter, I guess. Happier." My stomach twisted.
Because wasn't that the whole problem? Mark hadn't made me happy in years, but suddenly I was glowing. Suddenly I was alive again, and even he could see it. That was the night I realized how easy it was to lie. It started with small things, leaving the house an hour early, claiming I had errands when I was really meeting Adrian. Smiling at Mark over dinner, while my mind was still tangled up in the feel of another man's hands on my body. And every time I walked back into Adrian's arms, the thrill of it drowned out the little voice in my head telling me this would all come crashing down. Because no matter how careful we were, no matter how much we tried to keep our world hidden behind closed doors, secrets like ours had a way of coming to light. One night, Adrian and I met at a small hotel just outside the city. We had promised ourselves we wouldn't, that we would be stronger, but the pull was too strong. I remember lying there afterward, tangled in sheets that weren't mine, staring at the ceiling when a thought struck me. "What if he knows?" I whispered. Adrian propped himself up on one elbow, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Who?" "Mark," I said, voice barely above a breath. He frowned. "Has he said anything?" "No." I shook my head. But sometimes I catch him looking at me differently, like he knows something's changed. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he exhaled and kissed my forehead. "We'll be careful," he murmured. "No one has to know." But the way his jaw tightened, the way his body tensed, told me that he wasn't as sure as he sounded. And then, it happened. A text. A single chilling message that shattered our carefully constructed world. "I know what you're doing." My blood ran cold. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. There was no name, no number, just those 5 words. Adrian sat up beside me, reading over my shoulder. He swore under his breath. "Who the hell sent that?" I swallowed hard. I don't know. But deep down, I had a terrible feeling. Mark wasn't a fool. And if he knew, then this wasn't just an affair anymore. It was a ticking time bomb. Every secret has an expiration date. Ours had just run out. The message sat on my phone like a bomb waiting to detonate. I know what you're doing. 5 words, no name, no explanation, just a warning, a threat. Adrian was the first to react. He took my phone, his face set in stone. It could be spam, he said, but his voice wasn't steady. Or someone playing a sick joke. But we both knew better. This wasn't random. Someone knew, and the only question left was who. From that moment on, everything changed. I stopped sleeping. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach twisted. Every glance from Mark felt like an accusation. I started analyzing every moment, every detail. Had I left a clue? Had someone seen us? Did I say something? Adrian tried to keep me calm, but even he was on edge. Our secret meetings became rushed, our touches more desperate, our words laced with fear. For the first time, the weight of what we had done pressed down on me. Not just the guilt, not just the fear of getting caught, but the terrifying truth that I might lose everything. At first, Mark didn't say anything. That was what scared me the most. He still went to work, still ate dinner across from me, still acted like everything was normal. But his silence was too perfect, too controlled. It was like he was waiting. Then, one night, it happened. I was standing at the sink, rinsing off dishes, trying to pretend my hands weren't shaking when he spoke. I ran into someone today, Mark said, his voice too casual. I froze. Slowly, I turned to face him. Oh? Who? He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms, his eyes locked onto mine, unreadable. An old friend, works in security. My heart pounded. Security? He nodded. Yeah, he does surveillance work now. Interesting job. The room felt like it was shrinking. My vision tunneled. Because I knew what he was saying. Mark knew. And he wanted me to say it first. I don't remember walking to the table. I don't remember sitting down. All I remember is the crushing weight in my chest as I finally said the words. Mark, I whispered. I need to tell you something. He didn't react, just stared, waiting. My hands trembled, my throat was dry. But there was no going back now. I've been seeing someone, I admitted, my voice barely a breath. For a moment, Mark didn't move, didn't blink. Then he laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent a chill down my spine. I know, he said. My stomach dropped. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Mark leaned forward, his expression calm, too calm. You really thought I wouldn't find out? I swallowed hard. How long have you known? Long enough. The room was suffocating. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Mark, don't. He cut me off. His voice wasn't angry. It was worse. It was final. I felt the tears before I even realized I was crying. I didn't mean for it to happen, I choked out. You just what? He asked, tilting his head. Needed attention? Needed someone to make you feel special? The words hit harder than I expected, because they were true. I had spent so long blaming Mark for the distance between us, for the way our marriage had crumbled. But now, sitting across from him, I realized something I hadn't let myself see before. I hadn't just fallen into an affair. I had chosen it. Every text, every stolen glance, every touch behind closed doors. I had made a choice, and now I was paying for it. Mark stood up. I'll have my lawyer contact you. Panic surged through me. Mark, wait. He shook his head. You don't get to beg, Jane. Not after this. Tears streamed down my face. I still love you, I whispered. He gave me a long, hard look. No, he said. You don't. And then he walked away. I never saw Adrian again. Not in his office. Not anywhere. I heard from someone that he resigned, left town. Maybe he thought disappearing would fix things. Maybe he just couldn't face me. I don't know. All I know is that in the end, I lost both of them. And the worst part, I wasn't sure which loss hurt more.